Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about picking your faction in Enlisted. So, picking your faction is interesting, right? To some people, it's pretty important to them. It's going to be their main, where they're going to dedicate most of their time, and because of that, it's a very important personal choice. To other people, it's just what they're playing first, and they know they're going to play everything eventually, and it doesn't matter so much. And for other people, they just want to play whatever is meta or the most powerful. Maybe they don't have a whole lot of time on their hands, so when they do play, they want to have people to play with, and they want them to not suck. They're all valid points of view. So, there are 4 factions in Enlisted as of today. We have the USSR, we have the Western Allies, we have the Axis in Europe, and we have Japan. Now, in-game, the Western Allies are probably called America or USA, and the Axis in Europe is called Germany, but that gets us into those 2 factions first, I guess. Their names are kind of misleading. If we look at America, for example, America isn't just America. America has the USA, it has Britain, and it actually has French Algerians. So there's more to the faction than what initially meets the eye. Same thing with Germany. It's not just Germany, it's actually Germany, Italy, and you can argue Hungary and Romania. They don't have soldiers in the game, but they do have vehicles and weapons from Hungary and Romania. Japan is just Japan, though, and the USSR is just the USSR, so they're pretty straightforward. Now, the things that I think you should look at when you're picking a faction, regardless of which system you fall into, are how popular is that faction, what kind of weapons do they get and how do they play, what kind of vehicles do they get and how do they play. And I think those are the universal ones. Now, a player who has a historical tie to one of these, or a national tie to one of these factions, and that's why they want to play, they're probably already decided, and this probably doesn't matter to them. Likewise, there are also probably players who are going to pick their faction just by how cool they look, and I think that that's kind of in the eye of the beholder, but I can give my takes on those too. So, let's start with Germany and why you might want to play Germany. Germany is probably the most popular faction in the game right now. But that being said, it depends on when you play the game. I find that there are like peak hours where there's lots of people playing Germany, and then I find that there are other hours where there's lots of people playing, say, America. And so your matches, if you're playing solo, may vary a little bit, especially at top tier. It's less of an issue when you're playing lower BR. That being said, I do believe that they're the most popular faction, and it kind of makes sense. They are the chief antagonist of World War II. They're very interesting because of that, and they fight basically everybody. And so you get a lot of variety in the maps that you play on, and you get a lot of variety in the weapons that you get to use. So, looking at Germany at low BR, you're going to have access to alright assault weapons for your SMGs. They're not fantastic at BR1, but they'll get the job done. But they really open up in BR2, because at BR2 you get access to things like the FNAB, and later you get the MP38 and the MP40. Also, the low-tier German armor is phenomenal. Tier for tier, they probably have some of the best infantry support armor in the game, but a lot of the balance in Enlisted is asymmetrical, where you won't get two vehicles that do the exact same thing for different factions. You'll get a vehicle that's very good at supporting infantry for one faction, and a vehicle that's very good at staying alive for a different faction, for example. The two that I'm thinking of in this case are the Panzer 3 and 4 with the short 75, and then if you look at, say, America, they have the Grant. Or if you look at Russia, they have the T-50. So, Germany has a lot of very good general-purpose tanks, with the Panzer III J1 and the J2 at low BR. But I find that their vehicles at low BR tend to either be very good at supporting infantry and killing infantry, or they're very good at fighting other tanks, but there's not a ton of crossover there. And across the board, they have very average and somewhat mediocre armor. And I feel the same way about their mobility. They do have the Puma at low BR, which is a highly mobile tank with a very good gun. It's very good at maneuvering and flanking. But I don't think any other faction really holds a candle to how good Germany is at just laying waste to infantry at low BR with their tanks. Likewise, if we look at their planes, they have pretty good plane options, but their planes are generally speaking dedicated attack planes or dedicated fighters, at least at this BR. Most of your fighters are going to carry a fairly limited armament. They might carry some 50 kilo bombs, so you can take out infantry. If you're very precise, you can take out tanks, but a lot of them are either going to get large caliber machine guns, or they're going to get like 20 mil cannons. And like the C-202 is fantastic for air superiority. Likewise, some of the Ju-87s at this BR are fantastic, just general purpose planes. The D5, for example, you get a 250 kilo bomb, 450 kilo bombs, and you get 20 mils. And even though it's not the fastest plane in the world, and it's not the best turning plane in the world, if you need to use it to shoot down a plane in a pinch, it's pretty competent because of its 20 mils. But like I said before, most of the attack planes, like most of the Ju-87s, you don't really want to go and fight other planes with. And those are your primary low BR attack planes. As far as their rifles go, they have very good bolt-action rifles. The pre-war Kar-98 is fantastic. The normal Kar-98, perfectly adequate weapon. I like the sights on the Kar-98s a lot, and I think that's mostly why I like them. When you get to BR2, though, the Armaguerra is honestly pretty okay. I know it isn't a very popular gun, but it fires a 6-round clip-loaded semi-automatic rifle. I like it because it's a decent semi-automatic rifle, even though it doesn't have a ton of ammo, but it's BR2. And I think it does well because of that. I think their AT weapons, though, at low BR are kind of lacking. I would go with the Sturm pistol, but I think there are other factions that have much better AT options at BR2. Moving into the higher BRs, though, Germans basically have the best armor in the game the further you get into their tech tree, and they go from having this, like, infantry support or AT, to moving to having general purpose tanks, to moving to having Apex tanks, basically. The guns basically just get better and better, and the armor gets better and better as you climb the ranks, culminating in the Tiger 2H that right now is probably the best tank in the game. But even if you were to use the Tiger 2H, the Tiger 2P, the Tiger E, the Panther G, the Panther A, they're all phenomenal tanks that are perfectly capable of holding their own against every faction that you fight against. And they're equally capable of destroying infantry as they are to engaging all of the enemy tanks that you'll come across. So if you're a dedicated tank player, I think Germany is the faction for you. Their air tree continues the same kind of specialized roles that they have before, where you either have dedicated ground attack planes or you have dedicated fighters. Most of their fighters still carry the 50 kilo bomb loadout, which helps on the ground, but it doesn't really give them a very good flex roll. That being said, some of their attack planes do flex very well. The Focke-Wulf 190s are very good at both being a fighter and a bomber. It's just they're less maneuverable than most of the planes that you're going to see in the fighter role, so just be aware. I don't think you can go wrong playing them if you do prefer aircraft. I think that their planes across the board perform very well, and they have a plane that fits every need. Ultimately, you could throw multiple planes on your lineup if that's your cup of tea. Looking at their submachine guns and assault rifles, they're some of the best in the game the further you go. The Beretta M38 and its variants are awesome. They're basically 40 round MP40s, so they don't have a ton of fire rate, but they're very controllable and they've got a ton of ammo, so I like that. And it culminates in the end of the tree in German assault rifles, and regardless of whether you go with the MKB 42, 43, or the STG 44, they are all fantastic guns. You're really just picking up more and more fire rate as you go. There's really nothing bad to say about them. They're just very good general purpose weapons, and you can outfit lots of assault squads with them. You can put them on some of your guys in your APCs. They're just all around good weapons. Additionally, I think their rifle tree gets better and better, but it does kind of hang up a little bit in BR3 and 4. The Gewehr 41 and 43, they're perfectly adequate weapons, but I don't think that they feel very good to use. They're great for clearing a room, but they sometimes feel inaccurate if you're shooting at people over distance. So just be aware of that. The ZH is a fantastic gun, but it doesn't have particularly good sights. So as long as you don't mind having meh sights, it's a fine gun. And then you get to the FG-42s, and the FG-42-2 is phenomenal. It's a fantastic gun whether you put it on full auto or keep it on semi-auto, and with it you can run very large squads that can put down lots of firepower. Now, looking at the German machine guns, they tend towards a more sedentary defensive playstyle, but they can be used very effectively when you're playing aggressively. Early on, I find them kind of lacking with the Beretta and the MG13, but by the time you get the ZB26, they start to really pick up, and it culminates in 3 of the best machine guns in the game in BR4 and 5, with the MG15, the MG34 Patronentrommel, and the MG42. Of the 3, I think my favorite is still the MG34 Patronentrommel, because I think it's got the most balanced stats. It's a nice combination of fire rate, ammo capacity, and stopping power. Now, they all fire the same bullet, but the MG42 fires faster, and the MG15 fires much faster. But they're all good guns, and all 3 of them can be used interchangeably. Just understand that compared to, say, America or Russia, if you're a big machine gun player, or if you're really into playing machine gun squads, then these aren't going to be as mobile, and they're not going to be as good at assaulting objectives. So, moving on from Russia, or from Germany, I can words, I promise. Let's look at America. Now, if Germany has the best tanks in the game, America across the board has the best aircraft in the game. If we look at their aircraft at low BR, they do start off kind of slowly with the Seagull and the Hurricane, and they don't really have a ton to offer. Admittedly, though, I think the Hurricane's a little bit of a sleeper. It has two 250-pound bombs on it, which is actually really good. It's just the 7.7s are not. But it does go into your fighter role, which is really nice. Now, the American planes across the board are more or less going to have 50 cals. A lot of the fighters will have small bombs, and a lot of the attack planes will have rockets or larger bombs. Very early on, though, you get the Dauntless, and the Dauntless can carry a 1,000-pound bomb and two 100-pound bombs, and with that, you can bring it into any BR, and you can take out anything in the game. It doesn't matter what it is. Concentration of infantry, gone. Tank, gone. It doesn't matter. You see it, you can kill it. It's a fantastic plane. Likewise, most of the P-38s are very good in that they can flex between striking targets and providing air superiority. Now they bring M8 rockets, which admittedly are not the best in the game, but if you fire off all of them at a target, you can usually take out a priority target like a tank with it. Moving on from there, they have the Beaufighter, which it's a little bit sluggish, but it's very good at killing things on the ground. The RP3s perform fantastically. I really have nothing bad to say about it, other than it's kind of a whale. But being a big two-engine attack plane, it's kind of what you would expect from it. Now, from there forward, America basically has the best planes in the game, bar nothing. The P-51D5 is a fighter that is an incredibly good attack plane, despite being in the fighter role, and it's an incredibly good fighter at the same time. It's fast, it turns alright, but it carries two 500-pound bombs, and it carries a full load of 50 cals. The AP-1 is a carrier-based plane, it carries two 500-pound bombs. The A-20 is a twin-engine attack plane with a boatload of 50 cals and four 500-pound bombs. The AP-4C is probably the best fighter in the game, in my opinion, in that it carries 8 HVARs, which just absolutely lay waste to whatever you point them at on the ground, and it has 420 mils that just evaporate everything they shoot at. And then it culminates with the P-47, which is probably the best plane in the game, in that it's respectable as a fighter, but it also carries a full load of 10 HVARs and one 500-pound bomb, giving you multi-strike potential and the ability to take out anything on the ground. So, if you are an aircraft player, if that's your gem, America is definitely the way to go. Looking at their armor is interesting. They have a combination of mobile tanks and more general purpose infantry support vehicles. So the M13 is alright, but you're pretty exposed. It's basically an AA gun, but AA guns are pretty good at shredding infantry. However, moving on from there, you get access to the Stuarts, and the Stuarts are everybody's worst nightmare. You can zip around the map with them, you can flank, you can hit people from the sides, from the rear. They're relatively small, so you can hide them well. They're very good, very mobile tanks, but you have to have kind of a rat mentality to play them well. The next big highlight is probably the Grant. It's a bit of an oddity in the American tree in that for its BR it actually has phenomenal armor and staying power, and it's relatively sluggish. It's probably the closest thing to a heavy tank that you're going to find in the mainline American tech tree. other than, say, the Jumbo. But it has two guns, which makes it kind of interesting. It's got a casemate and it's got a turret. One's a smaller caliber gun and one's a larger caliber gun. It's pretty good, but it does take a bit of time to get the crew ready to use it because you have so many different stations in the tank and you really need all of your crew, and you don't start with a crew that's really capable of that. Moving on from there, the next big highlight is probably the M4A3 105, but we're going to make one quick stop before we get there. Right before that, there's 3 different Shermans. They're all very average, but because they're very average, they're not really bad at anything. They have a pretty quick firing gun, they're pretty mobile, their armor is okay, but if you play up, it's not going to hold up. The M4A3 105, however, even though you're going to have to play up with it, it is a fantastic infantry support tank in that if you see infantry, they're gone. You blow them up. And then their buddies that are around the corner next to them, they're gone too. It just has tremendous blast radius, and it's excellent at providing fire support to your infantry. The only caveat is that it cannot deal with tanks. Moving on from there, most of the AT guns I find pretty lacking for America. The M10 and the M18 I think are over BR'd because essentially what they do is the same thing that the other tanks already do, but they have less armor. That being said, the Jumbo is a phenomenal tank. It has a ton of armor, and as long as you can protect your machine gun port, you have a pretty good chance of staying alive with it. You can deal with most, but not all of the enemy armor, and because of its armor, it has a lot of staying power, so you can keep machine gunning and shelling whatever Germans you see, or whatever Japanese you see, and keeping your troops, I don't know, alive. Moving on from there, the M4A176W I would personally take over the A2, but that's mostly because you can play into BR4 and play a full BR4 lineup and fight Japan. I don't really think the 76W should be BR5, I think it's over BR'd. It doesn't really gain a whole lot over the A1, it's just a little bit faster. But effectively they have the same armor. The gun on it's pretty good, but it's not good enough to deal with Tiger II H's, but anything short of that you should be able to deal with. Just know that you have very mediocre armor and it's not going to hold up real well. So that's to say that the American armor line is fairly average. It's really nothing to write home about, but they have vehicles that can handle most things that you might want. Looking at their AT weapons, at low BR, they actually perform very well. You get access to the M1 bazooka and the Piet very early on, and the two of those are both fantastic at BR2. They can pretty much deal with whatever you see. The Piet's probably better than the bazooka because the bazooka's penetration is kind of low at 60 mils, but it's easier to aim than the Piet. Later on, however, the Americans cap out with the M9 bazooka, and it is not good. It's kind of pathetic. Which is to say that your anti-tank potential as an infantryman in the American tech tree is probably going to be found wanting. Looking at their submachine gun tree, they have some nice things there. They have some sleepers in the Sten and the M3, the grease gun. They perform pretty well at low BR, but I don't think they're the like fantasy that you think of when you think about America in World War II, even though they were incredibly prevalent weapons. And so I find that playing low BR America can sometimes be, I don't know, boring. I feel the same way with their light machine guns. The Vickers Berthier and the Bren, they're fine weapons. They get the job done, but they're not very exciting, and they're not really like prime freeaboo fantasy. That being said, they're all respectable guns, and you can't really go wrong with them. They basically favor stability over fire rate, but they also hit pretty hard, especially the grease gun since they're firing a 45. As far as the rifles go, they're fine. The thing is, most rifles in most tech trees are basically the same. Like almost all of them, you're gonna have your standard rifle, you're gonna have your slower firing rifle that has more damage and hits harder further out, and then you're gonna have your fast firing rifle that doesn't have a bayonet. So for Germany, your good rifles, your pre-war Kar 98, your fast-firing rifles, your Mannlicher, and your slow-firing rifle is probably one of the Carcanos. I don't remember real well, but with the Americans, what you're looking at for your normal rifle are the Springfields, your fast-firing rifles, the Ross, and do they have a slower-firing rifle? Let's see. Yeah, I guess it'd be the Enfield. Regardless, I like the USMC Springfield because it's got a hooded sight. I like the Ross rifle because it handles real nicely. I would love to be able to recommend the Lee-Enfield No. 4 Mark I, however, Darkflow and all of their wisdom have decided to keep it in BR3, and because of that, most of the BR3 rifles for America just are not worth touching. There is one, however, and this is where your prime Freeaboo fantasy starts to take over. The M1 Garand. And the thing is, the M1 Garand, you can play it for the rest of the game. BR3, 4, 5, doesn't matter. I run M1 Garands all the time on all sorts of soldiers. The same thing starts to kick in with their light machine guns. This is where you get access to all the bars, and if the Germans are more sedentary, then the Americans are far more aggressive. Arguably, they have some of the best aggressive machine guns in the game. The bars are fantastic for pushing points, and their machine gun squads can still build heavy MGs, so you can still kind of dig in. So, if assaulting is your jam, America might be the way to go. Because moving on from there, they also start getting access to the Thompsons, and there are Thompsons in BR3, BR4, and BR5, and across the board, they are all awesome. Some of them have just slightly different stats. Some of them shoot faster, some of them shoot slower. Some of the sights are okay, some of the sights suck. But if you're storming buildings and hip firing, your sights don't really matter. Thus, if you're trying to live out that peak Freeaboo fantasy, mid to high tier America is a banger. You cannot go wrong with them. Between the M1 Garand, the M2 Carbine, the Johnson Rifle, the Bars, the Thompsons, the M2 Flamethrower, the 1919, it's just an awesome time. That being said, I think the American player base is probably the second largest in the game, but this is probably a controversial take. It may not be, but I think that the American player base has a problem with attitude. I think that there's a lot of extremely toxic players that play America, more so than just about any other faction. But you don't really have to talk to them, so it shouldn't really be an issue. It's just a mentality thing. They're constantly whining about things and moaning about things, but they have some of the best equipment in the game, with like the Drum Mag Thompson and the 1919 and literally every plane in their tree. I like playing America. I have a banger of a time with it. I just don't like associating with the people who play America. Moving on from there, we are on the USSR. So, the USSR doesn't have as big of a player base as you might expect, but it's a very It's a very good tech tree. In certain times in the game's history, it's had a huge player base. It just kind of fluctuates a little bit. And some of that I think comes down to the map selection. I think the maps that the USSR fights on are very samey. They need to get another campaign to really give them a new environment to fight in. Because right now at Low BR you fight around Moscow, and it's a pretty interesting environment. But everything after Moscow is either Stalingrad or Berlin, and it's all just city fighting. So if urban fighting is your thing, then Russia is the way to go, because you're going to fight in cities constantly. It's all rubble and buildings. As far as their weapons are concerned, their bolt actions follow that pattern I talked about before. The M91s, both of them, are slower firing and hit harder at longer range. The M38s shoot faster and are kind of your mainline rifle. And the Winchester is your quick firing bayonetless rifle. As far as their assault weapons, they probably have the best submachine guns in the game, bar nothing. And this goes for every BR. At BR1, you get the PPD-34. It has a ton of fire rate. It has a relatively small magazine, but that's not too much of an issue for it. Its fire rate and it's got an alright reload time, kind of make up for that. And I say it has a smaller magazine, but it's a 25 round magazine. Alright, so it's not actually that small. It's like 5 rounds off of what your modern standard magazine is, and it's 10 rounds off of what most of the other Russian submachine guns have. And moving on from there, they get the PPS-42 and the PPS-43, which are pretty interchangeable side grades, but realistically, they are so good that you could play them, never pick up another submachine gun in the game, and still have better submachine guns than just about everybody else in the game. They are that good. Playing at BR2 with the USSR, running through buildings and just blasting away with the PPS-43 and the PPS-42 has been some of the most fun I have ever had playing Enlisted. In BR3 and up, they'll get the PPSH-41, and they'll start getting access to drum mags, so if their submachine guns were already bangers before, now they're absolute bullet hoses. They have 71 round drum mags that just burnt away. Finally, at the top of the tree, you're going to get the Fedorov and the AS-44. They're your assault rifles. The AS-44 is kind of analogous to an STG. It's pretty stable. It's got good fire rate. It's probably the best that Russia has. But the Fedorov is a very competitive side grade. It basically will have more recoil and hit harder. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for. I think the sights are better on the AS-44, but I have a lot of fun using the Fedorov. I also really like the way it sounds when it's shooting. It's got a, bang, 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 bang sound. That's the best way I can describe it. I like it. It's a good gun. Looking at their rifles, they probably have the best progression for semi-auto rifles. What I mean there is that the Gewehr 41 and 43 for Germany kind of feel bad at times because, like I said, they're very good at clearing a building. They just don't always feel like they hit things that they should hit when you're shooting at longer range. The SVT 38 and 40 don't really have that issue. They feel much better to use, and eventually you get the AVS 36 and the AVT 40, which are basically just automatic versions of the SVT 40. The AVS 36 is different, but effectively that's what it plays like. The only downside is that they have kind of small magazines. I don't really like automatic weapons that have magazines smaller than 20 rounds, and 20 rounds is even not ideal, but these two guns are pretty good, and with ammo bags on your soldiers, I think they feel fine. Looking at the machine gun tree, starting out, they get the Madsen, which is hot dog shit, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. However, once you get past the Madsen, they have some of the best machine guns in the game. They fall into the same category of assault machine guns as America does. The thing is, they're more flexible than the American machine guns are, in that they're fairly capable of pushing and assaulting, but they have larger magazines, so if you need to hunker down and get into a sustained gunfight, they're very capable of that. The DP-27 and DPM are effectively the same gun, and the DT-29 is basically the same as those, but with a larger magazine. I like all three of them, and they're a ton of fun to use. But at their top tier, they get access to the RD-44, which is probably my favorite machine gun in the game. It's got a 100-round belt, it's very mobile, it does decent damage, it's got like the sweet spot for fire rate. I just think it's a fantastic machine gun. And for those of you that do want a heavier, more sedentary machine gun, they cap off with the Maxim Tokarev, which basically just lets you sit in a hunkered down position, shoot for days, and hit everything you touch like a freight train. Looking at their AT weapons, early on, they're actually pretty decent. The PTRS is probably the second best semi-auto, well, not even the semi-auto, it's probably the second best AT rifle in the game, second only to the Japanese. And once you get past that, they get the Panzerfaust 60 and the Panzerfaust 100, which both of them are more than capable of dealing with any armored threat you see from anybody in the game. It's just a case of being able to aim them more easily, but they're both phenomenal. As far as their tanks are concerned, they're pretty average. At low BR, they're more mobile, lighter vehicles. The T-50 is a highlight there in that it has pretty good armor and a pretty respectable gun, and it has 2 machine guns, which is pretty nice. The T-28 I think is kind of bait though. I often want to use it because I feel like it'll be good at killing infantry, but then I'm reminded at how terrible its armor is and how hulking and slow it is. So there's that. Moving on from there though, all of the T-34s are pretty good. They have pretty decent angled armor, they have a pretty good gun. There's really not a whole lot to complain about. BR for BR, the KV-1 is a behemoth. It's amazing and it's very difficult to kill. Highly recommend. And then in BR4 they get access to the T-34-85, and the thing is, once you get the T-34-85, you can effectively do everything that a tank would want to do. You have decent armor, you have decent mobility, and your gun can punch through basically anything that you see. So, while there is good reason to continue grinding out the Soviet armor, and there are cool things that you can get, realistically, once you get to the T-34-85, you could stop there, and you're not really missing out on anything. They do have one of the largest guns in the game at the end of their tree, the IS-2 and the IS-2 1944. The only thing, though, is that while they're fun to use, and while they can punch through anything in the game, they have a very slow reload, and their armor is not reliable. So, you can't go wrong with their tanks. They're probably not the reason why I would play this tech tree, though. As far as their planes, they're fairly specialized as either fighters or attack planes. That being said, their attack planes are amongst the best in the game, and are surprisingly flexible. The first plane you get, the I-153, is actually phenomenal. It's very agile, it's quick, and it's got rockets, and you can absolutely blap the heck out of infantry with them. The highlights in this tree are probably the P-40E1 in that it's a pretty good fighter bomber. It's got a 250 kilo bomb, and it's got a full load of 50 cals. Can't go wrong there. The IL-2 1941 is one of my favorite attack planes in the game. It does equally well as a fighter as it does as an attack plane. It's got rockets, it's got bombs, it's got 20 mils, it's got turn rate. It just doesn't have speed, but that's a-okay. Now, moving on from there, the next big highlight to me is the IL-2M. Once you get the IL-2M, realistically, you don't need another plane in the game. They do get other attack planes, I just don't think that they get better. I think that they're all side grades to that plane. It does it all. It's got rockets, it's got bombs, it's got 20 mils, or actually it's got 23 mils. It's got turn rate. Well, okay, it doesn't have as much as the lower BR1, but it's got enough that you can stay alive. Again, it doesn't have speed. Looking at the IL-10, that's kind of the main side grade to it. You get less drops, you get bigger bombs, and you're a whole lot faster, like 100 plus kilometers an hour faster. So you can make an argument for the IL-10. I just prefer the IL-2M. And as far as their fighters go, they're fine. They're pretty average. They'll shoot down whatever you point them at. Some of them do have 100-kilo bombs, which is actually pretty nice, though. So if I were looking at playing Russia, the standout for Russia really is their ability to assault and push objectives. They arguably have some of the best assault units in the game, with some of the best weapons in the game, and they can be a ton of fun to play at every BR. They are very competitive. Just know that you don't have the largest player base behind Russia, so if that's something that really matters to you, then you might be better off looking at America or Germany. You'll probably have more bots on your team as the USSR, but I think the weapons that you get are so good that a lot of the time they can be more fun to play than Germany or America. Finally, let's round things out with Japan. Now, Japan has a lot of very interesting equipment, but they're very limited in where they can fight and what they see. It's pretty much just Guadalcanal against the Americans right now. Their rifles follow the standard rifle pattern. The Type 38 carbine is actually a fantastic weapon. The Type 99 fires a little bit slower. That's really about it. I guess the Type 38 fires pretty quickly. It's got a bayonet. They don't really have the bayonetless rifle, I don't think. I'm pretty sure the Type I has a bayonet. It's basically a Carcano. Their mid-rank semi-autos are okay. I think the Type PA is pretty good at BR2. It just has a really limited ammo capacity. And the Type Otsu performs fairly well, but once you unlock the Otsu, I'd wait and just pick up the Type 4. The Type 4 is really good. It's a 10-round M1 Garand that reloads from stripper clips. They don't have an automatic rifle yet. We'll see if they come up with something for them, but they're pretty good. I like the Type 4. Their submachine guns, though, are phenomenal. I don't think any of them are bad. At low BR, you have the S1-100 and the Type 100 early. They don't have the best fire rate, but they're very stable. This is going to be a common thing for Japan. Their SMGs are just incredibly stable and incredibly user-friendly. The MP28 7.65 is probably your first big highlight, in that it has a 50-round stick mag and its recoil is virtually non-existent. The SIG 1920 kind of builds off of the same concept, but the Type 100 late is probably the next big highlight, in that it only has a 30-round mag, but it's got a ton of fire rate and it's very controllable. The Type 2 has virtually zero recoil, it's like 10-10, and it's got a 50-round mag. You can't go wrong with it. It's a phenomenal weapon, and it all culminates with the Tokyo Arsenal SMG, which is basically like having an MG42 that's pocket-sized. It might fire a little bit too fast, but I love it. It's amazing for close quarters battles. If you need to clear rooms, you need to clear trenches, you just cannot go wrong with it. It's awesome. It shoots at 1200 rounds a minute with a 50-round drum mag. Moving on from there, their light machine guns start off kind of slow. The Type 11 is kind of iffy, but I think it's a little bit of a sleeper gun. It's surprisingly good. I just don't really like how much of your screen it takes up, and it can kind of bullet hose. The Type 97 I would like if I could remove the scope. but otherwise it's pretty mid. But the Type 96 is fantastic, and the Type 99 as an assault light machine gun is phenomenal. The main difference is fire rate, and because of fire rate controllability, but you're getting pretty good fire rate guns that are magazine fed, that are fairly portable, and they have bayonets. So, what more could you want? As far as their AT weapons are concerned, the Japanese have some of the best AT weapons tier for tier in the game. Fight me. The Type 97 AT rifle is a semi-automatic 20mm anti-tank rifle. It's basically your anti-everything rifle. Anti-people, anti-tank, anti-whatever you look at. It's amazing, I love it. I just want to know how my soldier can carry it around and shoulder it. Moving on from there, you have the Type 5, which is my preferred rocket launcher for Japan. Now, you have no sights on it, but it shoots at the middle of your screen, so point the middle of your screen at the enemy and kill them. It's a BR2 rocket launcher with 100 mils of pen. So it's basically the high-tier American rocket launcher, the M9, except it's at BR2. That really makes you wonder about the M9. It's basically enough to go through everything the Americans throw at you, but if you want a more user-friendly experience, the Type 4 rocket launcher is also at BR2, and with it you're getting sights, and you're getting slightly less pen. That being said, I think it performs perfectly fine. They're interchangeable. If you like having sights, then the Type 4. If you don't care, the Type 5. Type 5 has more pen, so that's what I would go with. So, that is to say that for what they're fighting, tier for tier, their AT weapons are phenomenal. Looking at their armor, though, this is really where Japan is lacking. Everything that's below BR3 is terrible, and I wouldn't bother using it. Once you get to the Chiha shotgun, it's phenomenal. It's my baby. It's one of the best tanks in the game. If all you care about is killing infantry. It has 120mm cannon. It shoots HE. It reloads in like 10 seconds. If you see it, it goes kaput. That's basically it. Infantry, gone. Now, they round things out with the Chi Nu, which is basically their mainline tank. It's got a 75mm cannon. It does all the tank things that you want it to. It's pretty respectable. I have nothing bad to say about it. Those are really the two highlights for the armor tree. I wouldn't use anything else. Looking at their planes, however, they have very competitive options there. The first one that really stands out to me is the D3 with the 250 kilo bomb. It's pretty good for precision striking and taking out things that you don't like. Moving on from there, you've got the Zero. The Zero's an awesome fighter. It's got 20 mils, it's got 60 kilo bombs, so it can kind of do it all, but it's mostly a fighter. The B5 carries two 250 kilo bombs. It's pretty good. You're going to kill most of what you see, and they round things out with the D4Y and the Key 61, which, for their roles, are phenomenal. The D4Y carries 500 kilo bomb. You basically kill whatever you drop it on, and the Key 61 carries two 100 kilo bombs, and it has a combination of 50 cals and 20mm machine guns. It's fast, it's agile, and you cannot go wrong with it. If I was only going to put one plane on my lineup, it would be the Key 61. It is fantastic. So, Japan does not have the largest player base. I imagine it's probably the smallest, but it has a very dedicated player base, especially at BR4. You'll regularly see matches where the entire Japanese team are marshals at BR4, and most of my experiences with them there have been phenomenal. They might struggle a little bit below that, but I think that their weapons are good enough that if you're really interested in playing Japan, you really can't go wrong with them. So, let me know down below, what motivated you to play your faction? For me, I pretty much play everybody, but I started with Germany and then America and then Japan, and eventually I got to Russia after the merge. I love playing Russia now, though. They're awesome. They're phenomenal. I guess right before I leave, if I was gonna rank armies based on how they look, Germans are number one. They get the uh, their camo, and I love it. The Russians are number two. They have some really nice looking trench coats, and they have some really nice looking shankas. Plus, I think their late war drip with their camo looks pretty good. I'd put Americans third. The problem with America is that everything's olive drab. If they had more interesting uniforms, maybe. Some of their premium squads, though, and some of their special squads have things added onto it, like bandoliers and whatnot, and then they become a lot more interesting. And I would rank Japan last. I think they just have very bland and boring uniforms. As per usual, get out there, kick ass, take names, and win your games.